Chapter 3: Death Panels. In 2009, during the legislative wrangling over the Affordable Care Act, former GOP vice presidential candidate Sarah Palin posted the following comment on Facebook: "Government health care will not reduce the cost. It will simply refuse to pay the cost. And who will suffer the most when they ration care? The sick, the elderly, the disabled, of course. The America I know and love is not one in which my parents or my baby with Down syndrome will have to stand in front of Obama's death panel so his bureaucrats can decide, based on a subjective judgment of their level of productivity in society, whether they are worthy of health care. Such a system is downright evil." Had this been true, it would have been evil. But it was the exact opposite of the truth. The reason so many of us fought for so long for universal health care and are still fighting for true universal health care is that the system we've had in the America that Palin knows and loves has long been a de facto death panel based on the ability to pay. The gravely ill, the elderly, and the disabled are among those least likely to have enough money. Those unable to make money, or who have no money to spend, are the very definition of worthless within a market system that is based on selling a product or service at a price that is profitable. If you can't pay that price, you won't be served, even if you desperately need that service. Barr asserts that religion is necessary to free government because it gives us the right rules to live by. What rules are those, according to him? Those moral precepts start with the two great commandments: to love God with your whole heart, soul, and mind, and to love thy neighbor as thyself. As an atheist, Barr's first precept means nothing to me. There is no moral imperative to love something that doesn't exist. It is his second precept that is everything. The injunction to love thy neighbor as thyself is from the Gospel of Matthew and attributed to Jesus. I have never been a Christian nor read the Gospel of Matthew, but the second precept is one which I agree with completely because it is an articulation of our innate moral impulse of empathy. Is that moral principle less valid if articulated by a man called Matthew as opposed to a supreme being? Not to me. If you think it is, why? Barr insists that absent belief in a supreme being, any assertion of moral values is sentimentality still drawing on the vapor trails of Christianity. Or, in his more expansive mood, the Judeo-Christian moral system. The religion of Judaism is believed to have originated around 4,000 years ago. Yet in his speech, Barr said, "Scholarship suggests that religion has been integral to the development and thriving of Homo sapiens since we emerged roughly 50,000 years ago." Since Christianity has only existed for 2,000 years and Judaism 4,000, what was the source of moral values during the preceding 46,000 years? You know my answer. Our innate moral impulse that we call empathy, conscience, altruism, compassion. Homo sapiens, modern humans, actually originated between 200,000 and 300,000 years ago, earlier than Barr says. Anthropologists consider ritual burials to be an indication of religious ideas, such as an afterlife. Neanderthals also buried their dead, and therefore are assumed to have had religious beliefs. Every human society ever encountered has some sort of religious belief, and as far as we can tell, no other animal does. What sets us apart from other species, even closely related primates, is our ability to imagine the future, things that have not happened, things we've never experienced in the past. Neuroscience has recently discovered a small area in our brain's frontal cortex that seems to be uniquely human and the source of this ability. Every animal tries to live, but only we ask what happens after we die. Every pet owner knows that animals feel empathy. How often have our pets snuggled up to us when we are sick or sad? They do not need religion in order to respond. They love and hate, are selfish and generous, brave and cowardly. They can be jealous and insecure, or confident and independent. They learn from the past. If their human comes in the door every evening and fills their food bowl, they watch the door, waiting for their human to come in. What they do not imagine is what it will be like if they win the lottery next week, how their cousin Jim will react when he finds out his mortgage has been paid off, their best friend's face when you tell her she's coming with you on a world tour, and how it will feel to finally tell your boss to take this job and shove it. I know from teaching horses that you have less than 30 seconds to make a response to behavior you want to discourage. Otherwise, they don't connect your displeasure to their action. 5 minutes later, they will certainly know you are angry. They just won't connect it to something they did 5 minutes ago. Your pets will sense that a storm is on the way and seek cover, but they won't imagine that it has been sent by an invisible being to whom you must pray to leave your house standing. What distinguishes our brains is the ability to ask the question why. And it's almost the first thing every child asks as soon as they can talk. Once our brains were able to ask that question, supernatural beings became the answer to everything we could not otherwise explain. This includes the question, why should I share my cookies with my friend? Anyone who has a chance to see a bunch of different small children will notice that some will share their cookies without being told, while others are so recalcitrant that they have to be threatened with punishment. They grow up to be men like William Barr. Absent the threat of punishment by a powerful supreme being, Barr doesn't believe anyone will share their cookies because he wouldn't. He says so in his speech. Men are subject to powerful passions and appetites and, if unrestrained, are capable of ruthlessly riding roughshod over their neighbors and the community at large. Speak for yourself, William Barr. I have never had any such desire, nor do any of my friends. Enabling a psychopathic president to run roughshod over our country is exactly what Barr is doing right now. The political party he belongs to is about hoarding all the cookies. That is why they do what they do. They believe that certain people ought to be able to run roughshod over society and use the law to make sure they can't be stopped. Barr doesn't seem to understand that for many of us, the smile on our friend's face when we offer them the cookie is priceless. The system he is ready to uphold with force and violence, the system that lets a few rich men run roughshod over the community at large in the name of the Dow Jones Industrial Average, has no explanation for the 30,000 medical professionals from all over the U.S. who volunteered to travel to my state of New York to help our overwhelmed hospitals tend those sick and dying by the thousands from the deadly COVID-19 virus. They walked into danger when they could have remained safely at home. You can't have a society without cookie sharing, or to put it in more elegant terms, without the capacity to care for the well-being of others. Solidarity is the political term for cookie sharing, for the moral impulse, and it is solidarity that has enabled the human species to thrive. It is the glue that has held societies together. The effort to institute a national healthcare plan is a manifestation of solidarity. The only moral response to a person whose life or happiness is threatened by disease is to give them care. Period. To deny it to someone because they don't have the money to pay is not pro-life. The free market system does not share cookies. It sells cookies to those who have money. To those who don't, it sucks to be you. It does not see the ability to have food, shelter, and medical treatment as a right, but rather as a reward for being productive. Moreover, it does not acknowledge that society has a moral obligation to love our neighbors as ourselves. William Barr views the application to government of his own great Christian injunction to love thy neighbor as thyself as unchristian. I kid you not. Here are his words. Interestingly, this idea of the state as the alleviator of bad consequences has given rise to a new moral system that goes hand in hand with the secularization of society. It can be called the system of macro morality. It is in some ways an inversion of Christian morality. Christianity teaches a micro morality. We transform the world by focusing on our own personal morality and transformation. The new secular religion teaches macro morality. One's morality is not gauged by their private conduct, but rather on their commitment to political causes and collective action to address social problems. His argument becomes profoundly absurd when you apply it to the problem of healthcare. How do you focus your personal morality on needing a medical procedure that costs $100,000 when you can barely afford the rent on your apartment? Rob a bank? You couldn't earn it with the shit wages you are paid. How do you focus your personal morality when your neighbor needs the treatment? Do you perform the surgery yourself? What do you do when every other family on your block has some medical need? The only effective individual action you can take is to join with others to take collective action to pass a national health care plan that will take care of you, your neighbor, the families on your block, and every other American. But this solidarity is exactly what Barr condemns. At this very moment, William Barr, in the name of our government, is at the Supreme Court demanding that it become his death panel by ruling the Affordable Care Act unconstitutional. Flawed as it is, and it is flawed, the ACA is all that has enabled millions of sick people, very sick people, to access health care without which they will die. There is a crime called negligent manslaughter. I'm not a lawyer, and the wording of statutes differs from state to state. The gist of the crime is that, unlike murder, the death of the victim was not the goal, but the defendant's actions were such that they should have known that the victim's death was a likely result. Doesn't Barr's action to strike down the ACA meet that definition? Barr considers people advocating for collective action on social problems to be engaged in a performance of self righteousness. He said, this system allows us not to worry so much about the strictures on our private lives while we find salvation on the picket line. We can signal our finely tuned moral sensibilities by demonstrating for this cause or that. But it is Barr who is into self righteous performance. He expressed it perfectly. Something happened recently that crystallized the difference between these moral systems. I was attending Mass at a parish I did not usually go to in Washington, D.C. At the end of the Mass, the chairman of the Social Justice Committee got up to give his report to the parish. He pointed to the growing homelessness problem in DC and explained that more mobile soup kitchens were needed to feed them. This being a Catholic church, I expected him to call for volunteers to go out and provide this need. Instead, he recounted all the visits that the committee had made to the DC government to lobby for higher taxes and more spending to fund mobile soup kitchens. Volunteering at a soup kitchen is great, and you may help a few people. But what impact on the problem will a few members of this congregation volunteering a couple hours a week actually have? Where are the trucks and the food supplies coming from? People are generally assumed to require 3 meals a day. How many people are ensnared in the misery of extreme poverty? The parish that Barr has criticized is actually acknowledging the scale of the problem. and what would be needed to at least address the hunger component more realistically. Barr, meanwhile, is focused on the personal salvation created by having strictures in our lives. Hey, Mr. Attorney General, why not lock yourself in a cell and flagellate yourself? Destroying the ACA is not just Barr's personal hobby horse. It is the program of the political right that the GOP represents. We all know that the GOP advertises itself as the party of moral values and free markets. Free markets sound great because everything with the word free in it sounds great, right? Let me name what it actually is. Gimme, 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 and to hell with my neighbor. Moral values? Their moral values have nothing to do with loving their neighbors. It's all about looking in their neighbors' bedroom windows to see who they're loving. Our economic system has always been a sort of death panel. Its goal is not to meet needs. Its goal is to sell products and services to those with the money to pay. This is fine when it comes to 50 flavors of ice cream or 300 colors of house paint. It's not fine when you have no house and no money to buy food either. Homelessness is not caused by lack of dwellings. It's caused by people being unable to pay the price the owners demand to let them live there. People are hungry not because there is a lack of food. Unsold food is thrown away every day. People who need the food don't have the money to buy it. And the people who have the unsold food just toss it in the dumpster. There are people who try to rescue the food from the dumpster. So the owners put locks on the dumpsters because scruffy people coming around looking for food are a nuisance. If the hungry people break the lock, they'll be arrested. Hungry people are obliged by law to respect the sanctity of a locked dumpster. No one is obliged by law to give these hungry people food, not even food no one else wants. William Barr claims this country was founded in accordance with natural law, a real transcendent moral order which flows from God's eternal law, the divine wisdom by which the whole of creation is ordered. The eternal law is impressed upon and reflected in all created things. I'm not sure what he means by that. There is a natural law. If a hungry deer is walking in the forest and sees something to eat, she eats it. If she is tired, she finds a soft, sheltered spot and takes a nap. The same goes for a mouse or a cockroach. Only a human being, under our laws, is not allowed to do that. The forest is somebody's property. The food is somebody's property. That is our law, but it is not in any way natural. A homeless person described to me the difficulty of finding a place to sleep. You can't sleep on a stoop because that's private property. You can't sleep on a park bench because that's public property. On the most basic level of existence, when it comes to the things we must have, food, water, shelter, and sleep, a rat has more rights than a human being in our society. Yet the people screaming about the right to life when it comes to fetuses seemingly have no such concern about people who have been born, or at least they aren't passing any laws reflecting any such concern. Nope, just laws about sex, and more stuff about the family and sex. According to right wingers like Barr, who trumpet their moral superiority, such laws would destroy untrammeled freedom and make people dependents of a coercive state. Yes, it would be such a terrible tyranny to guarantee people food and such untrammeled freedom to dictate their sex lives. Our laws do not reflect the injunction to love thy neighbor. They do not follow the golden rule. This is not because of an assault by secularists on some past time of moral virtue. The laws did not reflect those moral values when abortion was illegal and only heterosexual marriages were legal when public schools had prayer. The only golden rule they've ever reflected is the one expressed by the classic newspaper comic strip, The Wizard of Id. Whoever has the gold makes the rules. Therefore, negligent manslaughter is not a crime when corporations did it in the name of profit. Corporations routinely produce products that they know, yes, know in advance, will cause harm to a certain number of people. The reason they dare to do this is because corporate law was created specifically to shield individual stakeholders from personal accountability when acting on behalf of the corporation. Under law, it's called the corporate veil. The worst that can happen is the corporation can be sued for monetary damages. Therefore, corporations calculate how much they are likely to have to pay out in death and injury claims and factor that into the cost of doing business. There's a term for that calculation: cost benefit analysis. The executives sitting around the conference table calculating the cost benefit analysis are kind of like a death panel, don't you think? A death panel, as used in Sarah Palin's Facebook post that started this chapter, is a group of people authorized to place an economic value on people's lives and decide which lives are of insufficient value to warrant an expenditure to preserve. In one famous case, not a single person who bought their product was deemed to have a life more important than their corporation's profit margin. Let me tell you the story of the exploding Ford Pinto that came to light in the 1970s, thanks to investigative reporting. It is so clear, so easy to understand, even if you know nothing about economics or technology. The Pinto was a small economy car that Ford rushed to market as American auto buyers were turning their interest from large American cars to compact, fuel efficient foreign models like Volkswagen. The Pinto became very popular. Mother Jones magazine broke the story that Ford engineers discovered in pre production crash tests that rear end collisions would rupture the Pinto's fuel system extremely easily. Because assembly line machinery was already tooled when the engineers found this defect, top Ford officials decided to manufacture the car anyway, exploding gas tank and all, even though Ford owned the patent on a much safer gas tank. For more than 8 years afterwards, Ford successfully lobbied, with extraordinary vigor and some blatant lies, against a key government safety standard that would have forced the company to change the Pinto's fire prone gas tank. This is what the GOP means by deregulation. A conservative estimate of the people who died from burns, people who would not have otherwise have been seriously injured in the collision, was at 500 when the story was written, though it may have subsequently gone as high as 900. Ford did not see these 500 or 900 deaths, or the people who were maimed for life but did not die, as people whose lives were precious. An $11 per car improvement would have saved 180 fiery deaths a year. The value of those lives, in other words, what the company had to pay out in claims, was $200,000 per death based on standard practice in liability law. Their cost benefit analysis calculated the likely number of death claims they'd have to pay based on the likely number of accidents, as opposed to adding an $11 manufacturing cost increase to the millions of Pintos rolling out of their factories. It found that it was cheaper to let the people burn to death in agony and terror, to leave their loved ones to grieve. There were no criminal charges brought. It was not illegal to sell exploding cars because freedom. At the time, people caught selling cannabis went to prison for years because, law and order. The people so in love with family values did not value those families at all. They valued wealth acquisition. The ones who fought for justice for these families were the atheist left wing reporters at Mother Jones magazine. This is why the call for law and order has always struck me as the bellowing of hypocrites. Those who yell the loudest are usually the worst people, and they are often standing at a church holding up a Bible. Every law is an answer to some moral question. Who has a right to what? What behavior is justified? What obligations do we have to others? The laws we have are not necessarily good answers to those moral questions because they are made by people, some of whom don't have good morals. The ones most lacking in morality tend to be the ones to give the word the most lip service. But as I discussed in the last chapter, when they say immoral, they mean people having sex for the fun of it, not corporations profiting from the misery of others. Now we have actual death panels. As the COVID-19 pandemic sweeps across the nation, hospital administrators in southern Texas have convened what they call an ethics panel to determine which COVID-19 sufferers will be admitted for treatment and which will be sent home to die. The tide of desperately ill people seeking care exceeds the facilities available. At other Texas hospitals, victims wait in ambulances for as long as 8 hours. There are not enough beds for them. It is the moral failure of the Republican governor of Texas that has led to the medical catastrophe. He had ample warning. He saw what happened here in New York a few months earlier when we were the epicenter of infection. He saw what did not happen here in New York: death panels. Our governor followed the science, faced reality, and rolled up his sleeves. The governor of Texas followed his psychopathic president's dictates instead, even though he was smart enough to know the danger from the virus was real. We, the people, are not psychopaths. We have seen the exhausted, grief stricken faces of the doctors with deep red marks on their cheeks left by their protective masks, begging people to listen to the medical experts and stay home. We have seen the tear-streaked faces of the nurses who have held the hands of dying victims while their desperate loved ones try to say a final goodbye over a computer screen. Republican officials in many states who know that people are dying for an election strategy have seen them also, yet they stay the president's demented course. I don't know what else to say about this, other than I am horrified. This did not have to happen. As I write, 170,000 of my fellow Americans have died. By the time you read this, there will be even more dead. Most of those deaths could have been prevented. With a moral government, they would have been. Let me be clear about this. A highly contagious virus jumped from an animal to a human. This has happened many times before. In this age of global travel, spread is inevitable, especially when this virus has the feature of being contagious, even when an infected person is showing no symptoms. COVID-19 spread from China to its neighbors first. Countries in East Asia who'd had recent experience with viral epidemics didn't waste any time in responding with the proper epidemiological protocols. Close all non-essential businesses, test, quarantine, maintain personal distance, and wear medical masks. They controlled the outbreak. Then the virus exploded in Europe. The world saw the tragic scenes in overflowing hospitals, watched the death tolls mount. Governments in Europe followed the protocols. It's all that can be done when there is no cure but the body's immune response, and no prevention but avoiding contacts with infected people. They controlled the infection. Here in America, scientists and government officials, past and present, sounded the warning that we needed to prepare, to act to head off disaster coming our way. Instead, the president treated this pandemic as if it were a PR situation that could be handled with lies and spin. He wanted the stock market numbers up. If people died, well, it is what it is, said the president, the one whose power William Barr fiercely advances by all means, legal and illegal. Perhaps Barr thinks that dying from COVID-19 is a personal salvation opportunity. Wearing face masks, a simple, effective strategy to prevent the spread of infection, Barr's president announced as a bad look and called on his followers to defy sensible policies by state officials mandating mask wearing as tyranny. My state's governor, a Democrat, stood against the president's lies and followed the science. As a result, we who were once the epicenter of the pandemic in America have brought it under control. That is my proof that so many who have died and who will die on this very day should have lived. I am an atheist, so I don't believe in an afterlife. These lives, each one unique, have been lost forever and always. Negligent manslaughter doesn't even cover it. There is no word for this, but evil. There's a question I don't know how to answer. Is it worse to lack a conscience or to knowingly override it in the quest for power and wealth? This I do know. Nothing has done more harm in all of human history than governments in the grip of evil men. Morality requires we rise up against them in every way we can, legal, illegal, violent, or nonviolent. I know that sentence will make some people afraid. You are right to be afraid. Confronting evil is never easy because for everything we define as evil, there is someone who defines it as good. That was one of the hardest things for me to confront, morally and politically. Life is not a comic book where evil characters rub their hands together in glee at the thought of doing evil just for the hell of it. Many of history's greatest villains saw themselves as heroes. You know my family history. It colors everything I do, everything I think. It is all well and good to support the idea of being a law abiding citizen in society. But what happens when those laws are made by people full of cruelty and hate? Nonviolence is an admirable approach to solving conflicts, and we all wish that thoughtful discussion could be the means through which we reach the best outcomes in society. But what happens when your society becomes a death panel? People prayed to God as they were hauled off to the gas chamber. It did no good. How many people cried out to their neighbors, those who had been friends for decades, to help them as the Gestapo dragged them away? But their former friends just watched, thinking whatever they were thinking. Or maybe they just turned their faces away in shame because they were afraid. What ended the death panel that was fascist occupied Europe were armies. I wish that weren't true.